In the autumn of 1896, on the 20th of May, at precisely 8:57 in the evening, during a performance of the Opéra Hélé in Paris, a concierge named Madame Chomette felt no warning before death arrived from above. The chandelier above the audience did not fall. The official record insists on this point. What fell were counterweights. 2 bronze discs, each weighing 360 kilograms, connected by steel cables to a reflector suspended behind the great fixture. The chandelier itself, 7 tons of bronze and crystal, remained fixed to the ceiling. Yet, in the years that followed, popular memory would insist otherwise. The story preferred the chandelier. The story preferred the fall. In the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, in a file dated November 1897, a marginal note written in faded ink suggests something the official investigation never mentioned. The note, discovered by an archivist in 2003, references measurements taken 3 days after the incident. The chandelier's weight, recorded in a requisition document from 1874, lists 7,400 kilograms. A separate measurement, taken in 1896 by forensic investigators, records 7,190 kilograms, 210 kilograms unaccounted for. No explanation follows. The chandelier hangs in the Palais Garnier today, its bulk suspended above red velvet seats, its crystals refracting afternoon light into patterns that shift across gilded balconies. Tour guides mention the accident. They mention Gaston Leroux, whose 1910 novel transformed counterweights into Gothic theater. They do not mention the discrepancy in weight. They do not mention that the original ceiling painting, damaged in the incident, was patched temporarily and later covered entirely by Marc Chagall's 1964 commission. Beneath Chagall's canvas, the old work remains, sealed between layers of adhesive that have begun to fail after 6 decades. Both ceiling and chandelier carry weight that exceeds their documented specifications. On a winter morning in 1862, when construction began on the Palais Garnier, architect Charles Garnier faced an unexpected problem. The site, chosen by Napoleon III after an assassination attempt made a new opera house necessary, sat above an underground aquifer. Steam pumps operated continuously, day and night, attempting to drain the excavation. After 3 months, the pumps had made no progress. Garnier devised a solution. Instead of draining the water, he would contain it. A massive concrete cistern was constructed beneath the foundation, its weight preventing groundwater from rising into the structure above. The pressure, Garnier calculated, would stabilize the building. Today, the reservoir holds water filtered through limestone layers deposited during the Cretaceous period. Firefighters train in its darkness, swimming through cold that never varies, summer or winter, maintaining a constant 12 degrees Celsius. The chandelier's design, commissioned in 1874, followed principles Garnier had observed in bell foundries throughout France. Bronze, cast in sections, and assembled on site, distributed weight across multiple anchor points embedded in the ceiling structure, each anchor connected to a counterweight system hidden in the space above the auditorium. A series of iron discs threaded onto vertical rods. Their combined mass calculated to balance not just the chandelier, but the bronze reflector positioned behind it. The reflector, designed to enhance gaslight, served a dual function. Its polished surface directed light downward, while its weight, distributed through separate cables, created tension that prevented the chandelier from swaying during performances. The system required precision. Too much weight in the counterweights would strain the ceiling mounts. Too little would allow the chandelier to oscillate, a phenomenon Garnier had witnessed in smaller theaters where suspended fixtures moved visibly during passages of bass-heavy music. In the weeks before the accident, stagehands reported hearing sounds from above the auditorium, a creaking, rhythmic, and faint, that seemed to correspond with certain notes played by the orchestra. The stage manager's log, preserved in the Opera House archives, contains 3 entries dated April 1896. Each entry mentions the sound. Each entry notes that an inspection found nothing unusual. On May 19th, one day before the incident, an electrician named Maurice Duclos submitted a report describing burn marks on insulation surrounding power cables that ran parallel to the chandelier's suspension system. The report recommended replacing the cables. No record indicates whether the recommendation was followed. The forensic investigation that followed Madame Chomette's death focused on the cables. Specialists noted a distinctive pattern in the break, smooth on one side, ragged on the other, The smooth surface suggested heat. The ragged edge suggested tension failure. The official conclusion attributed the break to electrical contact. A wire had touched the steel cable, short-circuited, generated sufficient heat to weaken the metal, and caused a cascade failure. When the cable snapped, the counterweight system lost integrity. The discs, each comprised of 18 smaller sections held together by pins, sheared as they fell. Instead of 2 large projectiles, the audience below faced 36 smaller ones, distributed across a wider area. Time equals 600 milliseconds. Madame Chomette, seated in the 4th gallery, was struck by a section weighing approximately 20 kilograms. She died instantly. 47 others sustained injuries ranging from minor contusions to fractured bones. What the investigation did not explain was why the chandelier lost weight between 1874 and 1896. The missing 210 kilograms represented roughly 3% of the total mass, enough to alter the counterweight calculations, enough to change the tension distribution across the suspension system. In 1964, when workers removed portions of the damaged ceiling to install Chagall's commission, they discovered something unexpected. Behind the plasterwork, in a space not accessible during routine maintenance, lay a collection of bronze ornaments. Time equals 600 milliseconds greater than each piece bore identification marks, matching the chandelier's original inventory. The total weight of the recovered ornaments measured 218 kilograms. Why the ornaments were removed remains unclear. No work order from the 1890s references modifications to the chandelier. No budget document accounts for alterations to its design. Yet someone, at some point between the chandelier's installation in 1874 and the accident in 1896, removed components weighing enough to disrupt the balance Garnier had engineered. The counterweight system, calibrated for 7,400 kilograms, continued to exert force appropriate for that mass. The chandelier, now lighter, experienced tensions that exceeded design parameters. The cables, already compromised by electrical heating, failed under stress they were never meant to bear. On a September evening in 1966, across an ocean and 70 years removed from the Paris incident, another chandelier rose toward a ceiling. The Metropolitan Opera House at Lincoln Center in New York was opening for the first time. 21 chandeliers, each designed by architect Tadeusz Leski, ascended in sequence as the audience applauded. The central fixture weighed 2,000 kilograms. Its design originated from an accident. Leski, while sketching preliminary drawings, spilled ink across a page. The splatter pattern, radiating from a central point, reminded him of cosmic radiation photographs he had recently seen in Le Ciel, a text by French astrophysicist Jean-Claude Pecker. The 1960s fascinated themselves with space, with the Big Bang Theory, with evidence of universal origins written in microwave background radiation. Leski's chandelier captured that fascination. Its crystals hung on thin wires arranged to mimic stellar distribution patterns, each point of light representing not candle flame, but the birth of something vast and ancient. The Metropolitan Opera chandeliers employ a counterweight system, similar in principle to the Palais Garnier, though engineered with materials unavailable in the 19th century. Steel cables replaced iron. Electric motors assist the manual pulleys, allowing the fixtures to ascend smoothly, rather than being winched by stagehands. The weight, however, remains deliberate. A chandelier too light would lack presence. A chandelier too heavy would require reinforcement that would alter the auditorium's acoustic properties. 2,000 kilograms represents a compromise, substantial enough to anchor the visual center of the space, light enough to rise without mechanical strain. Weight, in opera house design, serves purposes beyond structural necessity. In Buenos Aires, the Teatro Colón's horseshoe-shaped auditorium seats 2,487 people. Its acoustics, considered among the finest in the world, depend partly on mass distribution. The seats, upholstered with horsehair, absorb sound at specific frequencies. The chandelier, weighing approximately 2.5 tons, acts as a resonant mass. When certain notes are played, particularly in the lower registers, frequencies between 80 and 120 Hz, the chandelier vibrates minutely. The vibration is imperceptible to the eye, but measurable with sensitive equipment. It contributes to what acousticians call warmth, a quality of reverberation that enriches bass tones without muddying higher frequencies. In Odessa, Ukraine, the opera house chandelier measures 9 meters in height and weighs precisely 2 metric tons. The weight, engineers determined during a 1980s renovation, matched optimal calculations for the auditorium's volume and ceiling height. Too light, and the chandelier would amplify unwanted resonances in the 200 to 400 Hz range, creating a tinny quality in string sections. Too heavy, and low-frequency absorption would deaden the space, requiring musicians to play with greater force to achieve the same perceived volume. 2 tons provided balance. The chandelier's bronze frame, combined with crystal pendants that add mass without significantly increasing surface area, creates what acousticians call a distributed mass resonator. It absorbs energy at specific frequencies while reflecting others, shaping the acoustic signature of the space. The principle is old, predating scientific understanding of acoustics by centuries. Medieval bell makers knew that weight affected tone. A bell weighing 1 ton produces a fundamental frequency lower than a bell weighing half that mass. The relationship is not linear. Doubling weight does not have frequency, but it follows mathematical proportions that craftsmen learned through trial and error. By the 18th century, Italian theater architects had begun applying similar principles to auditorium design. Francesco Algarotti, writing in 1755, described how suspended masses could be used to temper the violence of sound in enclosed spaces. He did not understand the physics. Wave propagation theory would not be formalized for another century, but he understood the effect. A chandelier of appropriate weight and placement would improve musical clarity. By the mid-19th century, when Garnier designed the Palais Garnier, acoustic engineering had acquired scientific vocabulary, if not yet rigorous mathematical frameworks. Wallace Clement Sabine's groundbreaking work on reverberation time would not appear until 1900. 25 years after the Paris Opera opened. Yet, architects worked with empirical knowledge accumulated over generations. Garnier specified materials for the Palais Garnier with acoustic properties in mind: marble for the staircases, which reflected sound; velvet for the curtains and seats, which absorbed it; wood paneling in the boxes, which resonated at frequencies that enriched vocal tones. The chandelier, 7 tons of bronze and crystal suspended in the auditorium's center, functioned as part of this acoustic architecture. Its weight affected how sound moved through the space, particularly during orchestral fortissimos when multiple instruments played simultaneously and the air itself seemed to thicken with vibration. In a photograph taken inside the Palais Garnier in 1889, the chandelier appears slightly blurred. The exposure time, several seconds long, captured not just the fixture but its motion. During a performance of Wagner's Die Walküre, a photographer positioned in the upper gallery opened the camera shutter during the Ride of the Valkyries. The chandelier, responding to sustained bass notes from the orchestra, moved. The displacement measured less than 2 centimeters, barely visible to the audience below, but sufficient to register on the photographic plate. The motion, engineers later calculated, indicated that the chandelier's natural resonant frequency aligned closely with a note near 62 Hz, approximately the pitch of B1 on a piano. Wagner's orchestration for that particular passage included sustained pedal notes in the contrabass section, instruments tuned to produce exactly that frequency. Whether Wagner intended this resonance cannot be known. Whether Garnier designed the chandelier to vibrate at that frequency seems unlikely. He had not yet heard Wagner's opera when he specified the fixture's dimensions and weight in 1874. Yet the correspondence suggests something deeper, that the relationship between architectural mass and musical frequency follows patterns that architects and composers both intuited before they could articulate them mathematically. The chandelier's weight was not arbitrary: 2 tons, 7 tons, 9 tons. Each specification resulted from calculations that balanced structural requirements, aesthetic presence, and acoustic function. In modern opera houses, these calculations have become more precise. Computer modeling allows architects to simulate how sound will propagate through a space before construction begins. Variable acoustic systems can adjust a room's reverberation time to suit different types of performances. The Guangzhou Opera House, designed by Zaha Hadid and completed in 2010, employs digital acoustic modeling to predict how every surface, including the chandelier, will affect sound quality. The result is a space that can accommodate both Western opera, which benefits from longer reverberation times, and traditional Chinese performance forms, which require clearer articulation and shorter decay times. Yet even with modern tools, the chandelier's weight remains a critical variable. The Guangzhou Opera House chandelier, designed by lighting specialists in consultation with Marshall Day Acoustics, weighs 1,850 kilograms. The specification emerged not from aesthetic preference, but from acoustic requirements. Time equals 400 milliseconds / too light, and the fixture would resonate at frequencies that interfered with vocal clarity. Too heavy, and it would dampen the space excessively, requiring electronic amplification that the architects wanted to avoid. On a gray afternoon in November 2019, a structural engineer in Seattle examined load-bearing documents for a concert hall renovation. The building, constructed in 1928, housed a chandelier that had hung unchanged for 91 years. Recent seismic retrofitting required recalculating every suspended mass in the structure. The chandelier, originally specified at 2 tons, now measured significantly more when weighed with modern equipment. The discrepancy, nearly 300 kilograms, initially seemed like a documentation error. Further investigation revealed the source. Time equals 300 milliseconds greater than over decades. Well-meaning maintenance staff had replaced broken crystal pendants with modern replicas. Each replacement, slightly heavier than the original, had added mass. Accumulated across hundreds of individual crystals, the additions transformed the chandelier from a precisely calibrated acoustic element into something that absorbed sound at unintended frequencies. Musicians had complained for years that the hall sounded dull during certain passages. The chandelier, no longer weighing what architects had intended, was literally dampening performances. The Seattle chandelier was restored to its original weight. Each modern crystal was replaced with historically accurate reproductions, manufactured to match not just the appearance but the mass of 1928 components. The cost exceeded $200,000. The acoustic improvement, measured by sound engineers before and after the restoration, was quantifiable. Reverberation time at 500 Hz increased by 0.2 seconds. Clarity measurements improved by 1.8 decibels in the mid-range frequencies where vocal and string tones predominantly reside. Musicians performing in the restored space reported that they could hear themselves and each other more clearly. The chandelier, returned to its intended weight, was doing what it had been designed to do, shaping sound through mass, through presence, through 2 tons of bronze and crystal suspended in air. In Paris, the Palais Garnier chandelier still hangs above the auditorium. Cleaning crews lower it once each year, a process that takes 12 hours and requires 16 technicians. The fixture descends on the original counterweight system, supplemented now by hydraulic safety mechanisms installed after a 1985 review of suspension protocols. Each crystal is cleaned by hand. The bronze components are inspected for stress fractures. The counterweights, hidden above the ceiling, are examined for corrosion or cable wear. The chandelier's weight is verified annually using load cells that measure to within 1 kilogram. The recorded mass, 7,182 kilograms, still lighter than the 1874 specification. The missing ornaments, recovered in 1964 and now displayed in the Opera House Museum, are not returned to their original positions. Their absence has become part of the chandelier's history. Time equals 350 milliseconds, greater than a permanent alteration that reminds curators and engineers alike that what hangs above audiences carries not just light, but the accumulated weight of decisions made by people whose names were never recorded. Today, when architects specify chandeliers for performance spaces, they work within constraints that would have been familiar to Garnier. Weight must balance multiple requirements: structural capacity, acoustic function, visual impact, maintenance accessibility. 2 tons emerges repeatedly as a threshold, substantial enough to affect room acoustics without requiring extraordinary ceiling reinforcement, light enough to be lowered for maintenance without specialized equipment. The exact figure varies. Some opera houses prefer 1,800 kilograms, others specify 2,200. Time equals 400 milliseconds / but the clustering around 2,000 kilograms suggests that centuries of empirical observation have converged on a range that satisfies competing demands. The chandelier in the Metropolitan Opera House, the chandelier in the Teatro Colón, the chandelier in Odessa's Opera House. Each weighs approximately 2 tons, not because of regulation or standardization, but because that mass represents a sweet spot where structural engineering, acoustic engineering, and aesthetic ambition find temporary equilibrium. If history is written by survivors, then the chandeliers that remain tell stories about balance, about the tension between light and gravity, about systems designed to hold weight suspended in space while sound moves through the air beneath. The Paris chandelier did not fall in 1896. Time equals 350 milliseconds / this remains true. What fell were the counterweights, the hidden elements that made suspension possible. What remains, what still hangs, what still catches afternoon light and refracts it into patterns across red velvet and gilded plaster, carries within it the evidence of every calculation, every compromise, every choice made by engineers and architects who understood that weight, precisely calibrated, becomes something more than mass. It becomes part of the architecture of sound, the invisible structure that shapes what audiences hear, when singers breathe deeply and fill cavernous spaces with voices that seem, for moments, to make chandeliers themselves vibrate in sympathy. The measurement endures. 2 tons, give or take, suspended above audiences who rarely think about why. The engineering remains hidden, the counterweights invisible, the calculations archived in libraries where dust moves through afternoon light like slow smoke, where documents wait for archivists who might notice marginal notes written in fading ink, where the numbers sometimes don't align, and no explanation follows.